Hello, fellow translators. So here is a problem you might have come across a couple times, or if you haven't yet, you will come across it. Someone contacts you for a job, or you see a job posting or something along those lines, and you apply for it and you say, this is my rate. And they'll get back in touch with you and say, oh, thanks for letting us know. By the way, the volume here is really, really large, so can you give us a lower rate? And you're thinking, wait, because the volume is larger, I should charge a lower rate? Does that make sense? Or does it not? Or does it? Or doesn't it? Or does it? Or doesn't it? Well, does it? So the interesting thing here is that actually you can do a lot of research on it. You can go on all the forums on pros.com, Translators Cafe, stuff like that, and you see a lot of people discussing stuff like this, and you will see people coming down on both sides. In fact, very often vociferously on both sides. Like you'll find people that insist, no, you shouldn't change your rate because that's your rate and that's how much you're worth, and it still takes you the same amount of time to translate a long text as a short text. And other people will say, well, no, but on the other hand, at least you're guaranteed work for a while, and so you can charge a bit less and stuff like that. And in essence, those are the two main arguments. And that's why at the end of the day, it needs to be a judgment call on your end. But there are a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, just because it's a longer job and there's more volume does not necessarily mean that it'll save you any time or be any quicker or anything along those lines. If they want you to use a CAT tool or something, that's a different story. We won't get into that now. I have other things where I talk about CAT tools because there are a whole bunch of other things to keep in mind there. But if they're just hiring you to work on a long translation, say it's a book or something like that, and they want you to charge them less, well, then you have to keep a couple things in mind. First of all, your time will be taken up from doing this, which means that you can't work on other jobs, other potential jobs, or other jobs that you have out there. And so you'll be doing a lot more work at this lower rate. Is it really worth the time for you or not? The other thing to keep in mind is the fact that, well, at least you will be doing work. If you're spending a lot of time not doing any work right now, and you find yourself twiddling your thumbs because you can't find a job, and then you do find a job, maybe it is worth it to do it at a lower rate. However, unfortunately, it isn't even that simple because so what happens if you do it at a low rate and then they want to hire you for other jobs, but they keep wanting to maintain that rate? At what point do you cut off that rate to your normal rate, and how do you decide when you should charge less and when you should charge more? Well, in essence, you need to keep this in mind at all times. If you decide, okay, because you're giving me high volume, I'm going to charge a lower rate, you need to decide, okay, that means that my rate for big volume jobs is this much, it's a lower amount, and it kicks into the higher rate at X number of words or whatever the volume is, so that if they send you a shorter translation, it automatically goes into the higher rate. And you need to bear in mind that this will apply not only to this client, but to other clients. And I've talked about this before, how there's a lot of communication and interchange between various agencies, stuff like that. People move from one agency to the other and stuff like that. And so their databases also get shared, or at least various people can get shared. It does happen. So just bear this in mind. If you decide to charge a very low rate to someone because they have high volume, well, you might be stuck in that rate for a while. But many people are perfectly fine with this. And if they get to work on something long, and this means that they're guaranteed to work for the next month or two, and they're very happy to do it at a lower rate, they're still able to make a profit, they're still able to pay their bills, and at least they aren't sitting around trying to get new jobs, and they don't have to do as much marketing and sales, then they're happy to do it for the lower rate. So it really is a judgment call, but the important thing is that you keep all of these factors in mind when you are applying for a job. And realize that the people hiring you for the job, they're just trying to get a low rate. That's the only thing they're trying to do. And so they're giving you the high volume, and they're trying to get a low rate and hoping this high volume will entice you to give a low rate. There's no real reason other than the fact that they don't want to pay much money. It's not like they get any benefit from the fact that it's a long text or rather than a short one, right? And in fact, if they are not the end client, they might be charging a higher rate because it's a long text. You never know. That's just guesswork. But they're basically just trying to get a low rate. Obviously, though, they don't want to hire many different translators for one text because it needs to be uniform. And so they do want to have the same person working on everything. But you really need to think about it along the lines of what's best for you and what suits your situation the most. And and just decide. And, at that point, it's a judgment call. And quite frankly, I know people who've done either choice and are happy with it. And I mean, it really can fall down either way, that you decide to charge less and at least you have that job, or you decide to charge more and maybe you don't get the job at all. Or maybe you get it and you can make more money or whatever it might be. I generally recommend that if you can get something besides the translation, then maybe you can make it work out anyway. Like say you're translating a book and you get to put your name there, translated by so-and-so on the new language edition. Well, that's pretty cool. And you get to add that onto your resume. So that might be worth a lower rate at the end of the day. Or maybe you'll get a new review and you don't have many reviews, then that's worth something in and of itself. Of course, it's a big job, so you have to wait a while until you get that review. And so you might want to evaluate there. Maybe it's worth it not to take that job, but to do 2 or 3 shorter ones so you get 2 or 3 ratings or reviews. And then that can kickstart your career better for later on. It really depends on your situation, but you really need to take these things into account and see which works best for you. But those are basically the factors at play here. And as long as you're not using a CAT tool, that's what's going to happen. It's not like because you're translating a book, it gets a lot quicker toward the end. And in fact, the risk is that you start rushing it toward the end and you start doing a sloppy job, and you don't want to risk that. It's still going to take the same amount of time. You'll know who the characters are, and if there's certain expressions and words that keep getting repeated, you'll know how to translate them. But not much changes. You still have to come up with a very good translation for the whole book. So you really need to just bear that in mind when you're working on this translation. So hopefully this helps you out, and hopefully you can use these factors when making your decision of whether you want to charge less or not when the client requests it for a high volume translation. My recommendation, however, is that you keep this in mind not only if you get asked for a lower rate, but maybe if someone has a high volume translation and you decide without them asking, oh, I can afford to charge my lower rate, you should let them know that it's because of the high volume. And you can say, oh, since this is a high volume of 200,000 words or something like that, then I will charge you a lower rate per word. Or give them a full amount for the entire job, because you want to make it clear that it's because of the volume. You don't want them hiring you for much smaller jobs later at that lower rate. And but yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully you can use these pointers. And if you know of any other pointers or factors or things to keep in mind when applying for jobs that are high volume, please feel free to let me know. And but I thought it would be important for you to keep these things in mind for when you come across a situation like this, because chances are you will come across a situation like this during your career as a freelancer. So it might be useful right from the beginning, right now, to think about, if you were in that situation, what will be acceptable? Would you accept a lower rate? How low would your rate go? And what would your requirements be for the certain job or for whatever it is? That way you already have an idea in mind when the job comes about, and you aren't left trying to figure it out on the fly, which can lead to mistakes. And I think it's very useful to have something like this in mind ahead of time, so that when the situation arises, you sort of know how to deal with it already. Anyway, hopefully you found this useful, and otherwise I will talk to you next time. Okay, thanks, bye. Savedum.